All right, so it's my pleasure to welcome somebody who has a lot of history with MCPL, and he'll go through, but he also was at the first planning committee of the World Congress when the first time it was here in 1991, and for many years before that. But let us all please welcome Andrew Capitman.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a terrific time at the World Congress. And well, I don't live in Florida, but welcome to Florida. So I'm going to talk about Barbara. And the context of this is always that good historic preservation never happens because of one person. So I don't want to be Barbara's hagiographer, but I did work very closely with Barbara, and it was a great adventure for me. This is the photograph that was in Portfolio magazine. It was one of the early important publications of MDPL. So talking about Barbara. So Barbara came from a German Jewish family. This is Marcus and Julia Weil in around 1865. Marcus was one of 5 brothers who came from Germany, German Jews. He arrived in 1848. His oldest brother arrived in 1840. And that was Barbara's great-grandfather, and his granddaughter was Myrtle Baer, and Myrtle Baer is the sculptor of this bust. So this bust of Barbara was done by her mother in 1940, and particularly after Barbara accomplished significant things here on Miami Beach, I always thought that this would be a great memorial. So if you haven't seen this, it's opposite the Cardozo Hotel on 13th and Ocean Drive. The Cardozo was Barbara's favorite hotel. It was the first hotel that we bought when we started. So Myrtle grows up, there's Myrtle. So Myrtle Baer grows up in Chicago. She goes to the Art Institute. She gets married to Herschel Baer, another good German Jew whose family had a mule business in Belleville, Illinois. And this building is still there in Belleville, where their livery stable was. And they moved to New York, and this is 1929. Herschel's business was fine woolen imports, and so he would go to Europe. And what I figured out relatively recently was the Baers were all German speakers, which is why he could have this Austrian-German import, fine woolens import business. But this is Barbara on her way to Europe in 1929. Myrtle was really quite a terrific artist. This is a sculpture by her. This is me. This is my brother. And this is Barbara's high school photo. She went to Julia Richmond High School, which was one of the first all-girl high school, public high schools in New York City. And her best friend became the actress Judy Holliday. And a year ahead of her was the writer Patricia Highsmith. So it was an interesting school, interesting times. I love this photo because you get the direct relationship between Barbara and the sculpture. And this actually is a self-portrait by Barbara. So this is Bill Capitman, my father. Barbara and Bill got married in 1948. He, like Barbara, was a real American lefty. And anybody who's got any confusion about how Barbara viewed the world, she viewed it from a left-wing perspective. She viewed developers as the enemy. And she viewed MDPL as an effort that was a political organizing effort. So Bill turned into quite a handsome old guy. And Bill went to law school and in the early 1950s was failed by the character committee of the New York State Bar. And because of his left-wing affiliations. And he ended up, Barbara and Bill ended up starting this business, the Center for Research and Marketing. So one of the important contexts to understand Barbara in is she got out of college, NYU, in 1942, and she got a job as a journalist, as a reporter. And she went from there to working for trade magazines, Modern Lighting and Lamps, Modern Plastics, those kinds of magazines, all the what used to be called the Fairchild publications of trade magazines. And she worked with designers. And this business was about doing mostly packaging design research. And along the way, Barbara also did PR work for some very important modern industrial designers in the 50s and 60s. Saul Bass, Frank Johnny Noto, Donald Deskey, Raymond Loewy, they were all clients of hers. So one of the big confusions about thinking of Barbara as a little old lady in tennis shoes as a historic preservationist is that she had this incredibly sophisticated publicity, marketing, design background. And it was, and you put that in a political context, because historic preservation publicly is a political effort. She knew how to organize from all her left-wing activities. They had a really nice life. This is Barbara, Bill, and our dog, Robbie. Robbie was a very good sailor. Sailing, looks like up in Maine, really in the last couple of years before Bill died. And this was from the early 70s. This American trademarks design. Again, Barbara had a very rich view of design history. Again, Barbara and Bill, this is about 8 months before Bill died. And he passed away, Bill passed away in 1975. He was 53, Barbara was 54. They had sold the Center for Research. And the last 5 years before that, he had been working first at Yale and then at the University of Pittsburgh in the business school and writing. And Barbara's trademark book came out in parallel to his book, Panic in the Boardroom, The Crisis of Corporate Responsibility. When he died, it was basically a year and a half after they had moved to Miami and he was teaching at Florida International University. And right after they arrived here, first Barbara got very sick with viral myocarditis, whatever that is. And then Bill just up and died of pancreatic cancer. So they were Bill's estate was $40,000. So he was, they lived a good life and they had well-educated children But they did not save. It was, he wasn't expected to die so soon. So Barbara had no money, and the issue was, what was she going to do going forward? And my brother and I made a commitment that we would support her as best we could, and she would do a social project. Well, Miami Beach was fast asleep. This is South Beach. This is the Cardozo, the Carlyle, the Netherlands. The first thing you notice is how narrow the beach is, which actually, from the point of view of the touristic experience of staying in one of these little hotels and just being able to be in the water in 50 yards was really nice. But it was very, very, very sleepy. I mean, you think about, that was most of the time. It's not that was 6 o'clock on the Sunday night. It was most of the time. There was nobody there except the old Jewish people. And so my Barbara and Bill had this marketing research capability. And when he started teaching, they would make supplemental income by continuing to do little research assignments. So they had an assignment. Bill died in July '75. There was a study outstanding for the company that made Brita water filters. And one of the target markets for Brita water filters was older people. And so their research technique was to do first focus group interviews. So we had to find a bunch of old people. And we actually came right here to the community center of this temple to do, we gave the temple $10 each for each person who did our interview with us. And there are many apocryphal stories, but my story is, we were down here doing this, interviewing, and Barbara was walking around. She said, this is... So she decided that this would be her project and founded the Miami Design Preservation League in 1976. So the place is deserted. This is the culture. This is the culture that was here. And one thing I'd like to stress is the big thing that was going on in historic preservation in America was this question of gentrification in old urban neighborhoods. And the terrible thing was that those were usually neighborhoods of people of color. So that historic preservation ended up looking like a really racist thing. In Miami Beach, there was this indigenous culture, right? This was the first temple. This was always, South Beach was always very Jewish. All the big owners from the Catskills had here. The Ritz Plaza started out as the Grosvenor Hotel, if any of you know Catskill history. And when we got there, these people who were almost in the first generation foreign born or second generation of immigrant parents born in the early 1900s. And in 1980, the average age was over 80. So this was a wonderful culture, but this culture was not being replaced because younger old Jews went further north. This neighborhood had a terrible reputation as, very Jewish, very Yiddish, very unassimilated. That's now, that next cohort of Jews didn't. Very early on, Barbara was very good at dealing with the fact that actually in the 1970s, there was huge amounts of community development money available. And most times you've got organizations without a great deal of organizing skill looking for community development money. And then you've got Barbara. And so very rapidly, Barbara was able to get MDPL set up with an office and a staff, and the big job of creating a historic district survey, right? So for nomination to the National Register, you have to do a historic district survey. She got a grant and got 2 kids from the Columbia Historic Preservation Program to come down and spend an entire summer doing the survey. And that was how they were able to start the process of first the state district and then the National Historic District. And Barbara was just a fabulous publicist. She loved journalists. It's so interesting to talk about this now because this is all a skill set that's completely changed, right? But in the old world, there used to be publicists whose main ability was to write people's speeches and write their press releases and send them out to people. And Barbara was very good at that. Barbara had an enormous visual sense. This is the Plymouth. If you haven't seen the Plymouth, it's a wonderful building. And great. And this is the first poster produced by the Miami Design Preservation League. And we have another one of the important graphic design artists with us now. Mr. Robles is here. But this was Woody von Dracek. He was an Eastern Airlines mechanic who came to Barbara and said, I'd like to do something. And he did this, and he did posters and graphics for us for years, like this. And Barbara succeeded in getting a big grant to do a historic district plan. And she organized it in order to get publicity as a competition. And she got all the big groups, the Baer, Blinder, Bell, Anderson, Notter, Feingold, all those kinds of big architecture firms with a historic preservation orientation to bid. Now, the chap on the left is actually probably the most important man in American historic preservation. His name is James Morrison Fitch. And he was the founder of the Columbia University School of Architecture, Historic Preservation, Landscape, and Urban Planning. He was the founder of the Historic Preservation Program. So Baer, Blinder, Bell, and for those of you who are New Yorkers, Baer, Blinder, Bell has a dominant position in New York in major historic preservation. They hired Fitch to represent them. And Fitch comes and says, well, I really don't like Art Deco, but we're super qualified to do this. So Anderson Notter won instead. And they did it. Anderson Notter won instead. And they did a very good job. And again, both from the point of view of graphics and from the point of view of organizing activity, this was the first Art Deco week. I'm a banker. Aside from my 5 years working on Miami Beach, I've always been a banker. But I came down for Art Deco week. And it was then that I decided that I would quit banking and go work with my mother and try to buy a hotel. So this was the first hotel we bought, the Cardozo. It also, like this temple, a Henry Hohauser building. And there was our first poster. And of course, I had no money, so I had to go out and raise the money. Every guy I talked to, I made the pitch to invest in the Art Deco, in the Cardozo Hotel, got a poster. And then once we had bought the hotel, this was our poster. Come back to the sea. This is a very important publication that came out. This was Portfolio of the Art Deco District. This came out in 1979. The NBPL, this is the remarkable thing. NBPL was founded effectively, our first meeting was December 1, 1976 in the Design District. It became a National Historic District in April 1979, so less than 3 years. And that was with ridiculous amounts of local opposition. The Chamber of Commerce, every big developer, this whole project. The thing that's remarkable about being right here is this entire area below 5th Street was slated to be turned into a mega development organized by First Boston with canals and multiple large buildings. What you ended up with is this ring of big buildings around the outside and this interior, and there's still, these buildings in the interior are not protected. They're not in the historic district.
Currently they are, but maybe back then they weren't.
Yeah. So it took from becoming a National Historic District in 1979, it took until 1985 for there to be a good local ordinance. And the local ordinance that was originally passed required owner consent for the building to be designated. And it was very interesting because Barbara got a really tremendous top lawyer at one of the big firms here in Miami involved, and he fought the case, and ultimately Dade County sued the city to make them pass a compliant historic preservation ordinance. The result of Barbara's efforts, all these pictures are from the 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, very early on. And this is American Preservation, which is the fancy National Trust publication. This is Progressive Architecture, that's Friedman's Bakery. This is Smithsonian, and there's the Victor. Travel magazines. Again, it's a different world. It's a pre-internet world, and you judged your marketing success by how much could you get publicity. I love this one, Soho in the Sun. So here's the New Yorker. The New Yorker was torn down in 1980. This is my wife, Margaret Doyle, who was one of our early historic preservationists, captured from Washington to come help us. And here's the New Yorker coming down, and within a couple of months, Bacardi, which is Absolute puts this out, right? So we had captured people's imaginations even in the destruction going on. So after I bought the Cardozo, I bought the Victor, and the Victor got its own poster. This was how the Victor looked when we started. Wow. And this is how the Victor looked when we finished. And this was all done without financing. This neighborhood remained absolutely redlined for years and years. The only financing, when you bought a hotel, if the seller was making a profit, he would take a mortgage back from you. And when I bought the Cardozo, there were like 5 mortgages on it. All private mortgages, right, because the banks wouldn't lend. This is Earl Le Pen mural. There, you'll see a lot of Earl Le Pens in the district. Incredible lighting fixtures, every one taken apart, re-chromed. And the funny thing is that all that furniture was there and it was just recovered the right way. And we turned Art Deco Week into Art Deco Weekend. And the first one drew 300,000 people, and it's been an important part of NVPL's continuing activities over these decades. We had wonderful people come to Art Deco Weekend. Eartha Kitt, Cab Calloway, Manhattan Transfer, the Ink Spots. We absolutely believe we believed, I personally believe, but we believed as a group that we were not just preserving the neighborhood, but we were using the neighborhood and promoting the neighborhood in the context of the rich cultural wealth of the 1930s, the film, art, music. It's not a terribly good picture, but that's Barbara, Leonard Horowitz, and Diane Camber. And Leonard, being the quite outrageous guy that he was, had made his bow tie out of paper. And that's me and Margaret in the same period. So that was for the Moon Over Miami Ball, starring Eartha Kitt. And then Margaret designed the Cafe Cardozo. And the Cafe Cardozo was the first restaurant on Ocean Drive. And it opened in 1981. And
don't go so fast.
I don't think there's such good photos, but I'm getting to the one that I think is really important. So what happened at the Cardozo was it was an incredible success. And all of a sudden people were saying, there's a culture here on South Beach. And that was a really important part of changing the image of Miami Beach or South Beach from being old Jewish people to being young, hip, perhaps Jewish people. So then in the summer of '82, Barbara set off in her Chevette on a round-the-country trip with a deal with the Miami News, RIP, but the second paper here, writing about Art Deco around the country. So she did 10 of these articles, and they were, San Francisco, they were Chicago, they were Tulsa, they were Baton Rouge, the Dewey Long State Capitol. They say Huey Long. It was right in this same period as she's going around that she's meeting with people and encouraging the creation of other Art Deco societies. Back in Miami Beach, I then bought the Carlyle, and Margaret did another restaurant, the Carlyle Grill. And this was the first time that we actually got third-party financing to do the restoration. And so we did a full restoration, with nice bathrooms, and it really was fun. And we did things like have the Back to the Cities conference here. And then the big thing in 1984 was Christo's Surrounded Islands. And the wonderful thing was, I don't know if you saw there was an obit for Mrs. Christo, Jean-Marie. Was it Jean-Claude, Jean-Marie? And she was Christo's business manager, and she was terrific. And she came down and she took all the rooms in all 7 of our hotels for 2 months. And the effect was enormous because Christo had this really global glitterati kind of following. And they all came to visit Christo, and they came to Ocean Drive to visit Christo. And so that was really important. And then in the fall of 1984 is when Miami Vice started. And I don't know if any of you remember Miami Vice, but Miami Vice opens with a great scene of two pretty women in bikinis walking up the steps of the Carlyle Hotel. So the Carlyle Hotel is also the hotel, the facade that's in the remake of The Birdcage, right? Not Les Cages aux Folles, but The Birdcage. And that's that hotel. So 85, 86, 87, there's still enormous fighting going on. This is the boulevard. The funny thing about Miami Beach history is that all the original big hotels were actually on the bay side, not on the ocean side. And this was the Biscaya, which was the last of those big hotels. And this is the Senator. And Barbara went and chained herself to the Senator. And she was not well. And this was kind of, she always talked about rousing herself from her hospital bed to go do these things. But there's an element of baloney in that. But there's a very famous Miami Beach hotelier named Ben Novak, who owned both the Fontainebleau. What's right north of the Fontainebleau? Yeah, he owned the Eden Rock. And Ben Novak is said to have said, "Never let the truth stand in the way of a good promotion." So 1988, this book comes out. It's got wonderful photographs by Stephen Brooks, and it is, I have to say, it is not the first book that came out on the Art Deco district. I mean, it's 10 years later at that point from when people, from 76. There is a well-known Art Deco silver collector, Jewel Stern, who wrote her thesis about South Beach architecture at the University of Miami in the mid-70s. And then in 81 or 82, a wonderful Rizzoli book came out by Laura Sawinski, little book. But this is a good book, and Barbara got this done. And it was off the back of that book and her trips around the country that she got an assignment to write Rediscovering Art Deco USA. So in 1990, the first the organizing conference of what became the World Congress on Art Deco in Miami Beach in 1991 was held in 1990 during Art Deco weekend. And just to be very clear, Sharon Koskoff was there. Tony Fusco represented Boston. Tony Robbins represented New York. Richard Striner represented Philadelphia. Steve Eisenhower, the famous architect at Venturi Rausch Scott Brown, represented Philadelphia. David Ledick, who was an American who lived in Miami Beach and Paris and had a fabulous Parisian apartment, spoke about Paris. And Yvonne, I know there's an Australian person here. Is it Yvonne Genève? Is that how she said her name? Does anybody remember? I think it's Yvonne Genève, was here from Australia. Genevieve. Good, thank you. So, and then Barbara and me and Michael Kanerick and Dennis Wilhelm. So that's Michael on the left, Dennis on the right. They have a very long history with MDPL and with the World Congress. And when Barbara died, it was 2 weeks after they signed the contract to do Rediscovering Art Deco. And so Michael and Dennis did this, and the book came out, and I'm proud of it. So that's what I have to say about Barbara. I think many people made the Art Deco district, but Barbara certainly had a central role. So thank you.
We're going to ask a few questions.
Sure.
We have a couple of quick questions. Anybody? Going once? Okay. Oh,
I know, and it's a,
here we, we're going to talk about when she ran for city commission.
so Barbara ran for the Miami Beach City Commission in 1983. She did not win, but she had beautiful buttons and posters, and and they were pink, and I should have one in the, and I would, next time I ever talk about Barbara, I will have that.
All right, anyone else? Okay, in the far back?
Yes, is there any publication, digital or any book on the history of the whole process of enhancement and preservation of the Miami Historic District?
There are a bunch of them, actually. There are several books. Nancy Liebman's book is one. There are a bunch of them, but there's not a Barbara book. And
But there should be.
there should be, but I think what there is a lot of what there is in our bookstore, isn't there?
And yes, you're right, in
Yeah.
the gift shop, yeah. But Deco Delights, I think it's a great, I mean,
Yeah.
Deco Delights was written by Barbara, right? And it's, so if you really want to see, do you have that book, Deco Delights? Yeah.
Shown now.
There's another book to write, definitely. So hopefully someone's working on that.
Do you still have it? Do you still have it at,
No, I think it's out of print, you know, and I have one in my home, and we have, I think, one in the archives. But we've been wanting to republish it, but the photographer, you know, maybe we have to work with the photographer on that, but it would be good to get it out. All right.
Did you give also archives, totality of the archive to the piano, or you still have different things you wanted to get?
Forgive me, I didn't get that.
Did you still
I'll repeat. Did you give all the archives to MDPL, or do you still have other archives?
just,
I have-
No, I understand you may have some because it's personal, but.
I have large quantities of Barbara stuff, and MDPL will get them.
We would be honored to be stewards of those. So thank you. All right, one more. I know we have a big celebrity here, but we have other presentations too. Bill Lister in the far back, who, by the way, is an amazing photographer, who probably should be doing a lecture too. Bill, what's your question?
Well, the answer is the same question about the book about the redevelopment of the district that we're putting in mind. South Beach, started with the Miami Beach, and
Okay, just to repeat, Bill Lister, South Beach, America's Riviera. It's also out of print, which I think now we've got a new idea. We've got to start a publishing company. Where's Roberta? Roberta, we got to reprint a lot of these things. But there's definitely a lot of interest. Sharon?
I have to say one thing. I dedicated my book, Art Deco of Palm Beaches, to Barbara Capitman.
Yes.
And then my parents were going to kill her. She made a newsletter Streamline. And then Steve Beck came up with Streamlines, but it's not, where's Streamline? So she told me to write a press release, and that really changed my whole life. So, we're going to write press releases and get education.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Angela.
Thank you.